I just look at this team that continues to lack an identity. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure you can agree to this. Even with the struggling Mets teams in the past, they still had an identity to a degree, but you said to yourself, oh, their glaring issue is this, and this is why they're not succeeding. Well, the Mets, even with their continued woes and getting length outside of guys like, McLean and Peterson for the most part, they have had such a glaring hole in that regard that while that holds true, what even holds a greater truth is that as we saw in this series finale against Atlanta, the Mets blow that 2-0 lead, which it feels like they've blown endless leads over the past north of a month now. And then they have no real clue how to retaliate, even against the lesser Atlanta Braves. The same would apply if it's the Washington Nationals. It really doesn't matter who the team is. It seems like it's kind of that same outcome should they find themselves initially blowing that lead. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way they're kind of like the bizarro OMG Mets. They are the opposite of what they were last year. Last year was like after that horrible start, they were never out of a game. They were going to bounce back every time, even if they didn't always win. You go back to that Phillies game 2, I think, when Vientos hit the home run. We're all losing our minds. They wind up losing that game anyways, which is like wound up being fine. But it's like, even if they lost, they were always punching back, and they won more times than they lost in those situations. I mean, we haven't seen that at all this year. And that's, I think, has been really frustrating because, it's almost like the Joker putting the makeup on in the mirror meme at this point of like, we keep expecting like, okay, this is the time that they're going to come back in the ninth. This is the time they're going to punch back. This is where Soto is going to have his like signature moment. And it's basically winds up being the same game every time. I was looking it up before the game or before the podcast, and the Mets have not come back from a deficit after the 5th inning in a month. The San Francisco Giants Sunday night game where they hit those 2 homers in the 7th is the last time they've overcome it. Like the 5th inning, that's 4 or 5 innings, and they haven't done it in a month. They're 1-12 in their last 13 games decided by 3 runs or less. The only win in August was that Nolan McLean's debut where they won 3-1. Other than that, it's basically like they either blow people out or they lose the game. And that's been really, I think, disheartening and frustrating. And I think it's that thing of you keep thinking they're turning it around and then they lose the same type of game over and over and over again.
And going back to what you were mentioning with the blown leads, especially, you get to then the 5th inning. We'll talk about the 4th inning. The Mets have the second worst ERA in all baseball, only trailing the Marlins in that regard for like an extended period of time for no good reason. They just have no clue, especially as we're getting that second turn of the order. It really feels like a lot of these opposing batters are getting to what have been a lot of meatballs from guys like Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, who paddled his own well his last time out there, but again, wasn't quality in doing so, hitting a lot of pitches. Clay Holmes has been looking sharp for the most part, but again, there just has not been that steady length, and that has continued to really plague this team in more ways than one. And, when you look at the start of this season, and I can't get over how even when things were going right and the Mets were pretty much rolling in the first 2+ months of the year, there were still major flaws when it came to the runner in scoring position at the time. And you knew that pitching was exceeding expectations. So it was just kind of this ticking time bomb. Would it all kind of crash down at once? And let me know your thoughts about this, Rich. But when Senga went down, it was just, it truly felt like deja vu. Like if before knowing about McGill getting hurt, Griffin Canning, and everyone else, it felt like that this was the start of the demise of the club. And that's held true to this point.
And it really was. I think 2 weeks ago on the podcast we had with Andrew Claudio, we talked about it. Obviously that Rays game happened 2 days later.
I was there.
Brutal. Oh God, brutal game. I remember at the time being annoyed, but like, I was like, they haven't had a loss like that all year. They have the best record in baseball. Like, little did I know that was going to be a game I was thinking about for maybe the rest of the year. But you go back to even the game that Senga got hurt, they did win that game, but they were up 4-0 in the ninth and came like inches away from blowing a 4-run lead in the ninth.
It was dicey.
And it almost was like the downfall started even in that game, but you didn't know it yet because they just got out of it. And they really have never been the same since. And to your point about even before that, when they were the best team in baseball, it always felt like they're the best team in baseball, but they're still not clicking on all cylinders. There's something slightly amiss, and you're like, okay, at what point is it all going to come together? And instead, what happened was it all fell apart together. And now you're in this situation where it's almost like sometimes you have a game where none of it's working, but a lot of the times it's just any given day, one of the aspects of the team is not going well. If they pitch well, they can't hit. If they're hitting, they give up 7, 8, 11 runs. Sometimes the defense decides to screw things up as well. I think there's like a meme out there where there's the offense, the defense, and the pitching, and the switches keep going on. They could never be
Yep.
all three of them
I've been
turned on at the
referencing
same
that all year.
time. And it really feels like that, and it's kind of why they find themselves in this position where they're just finding different ways to lose every game, but like you're not even surprised at the outcome. You're just like, how is it going to happen this time? But it's that's been very frustrating too, and you keep waiting for it to turn around, and maybe it's just like maybe it's our fault at this point that we keep expecting it to be better because the talent is too good. But at some point, it's like this is who the Mets have been for a while now. Just as long as they were the best team in baseball, they have been this version of themselves, and maybe it's just not going to turn around. Like maybe they will make the playoffs. I don't think this is like anything to do with the Reds at this point. It's really just like, can the Mets play decent enough to get in? But they've given you no confidence that even if they do make it, that they're going to do anything in October if they get there.
I know this is the slog of being a fan throughout an entire 162 because we can sit here and say, we hope to see the Mets gain confidence and really get on a heater heading into postseason play. And they may very well do that. And that'll be great if that's the case. But if it's going to be the latter, which is the opposite, and they continue to kind of just tread water barely and find themselves sneaking in because the Reds are just worse than the Mets overall, even
Mhm.
if that happens, who's not to say that they don't then wake up and have a spark? Because there's one thing that I've noticed with this final wildcard spot since the expanded playoff format is that basically every year out of the National League, there's been one team in that spot for the most part that's had a deep run. And out of at least two of those three teams, they scuffled in a postseason play, especially the Phillies in the year that they fired initially Joe Girardi
Yeah.
because the Mets combined no hit them. And then they had a great, not, end of the season, but middle of the season, they really struggled mightily in their final month of play. They just made playoffs still. And then they obviously had the run that they did. Diamondbacks falls in that similar category
Mhm.
among others. So
The Mets
it's
last
it
year.
it really does make it interesting to evaluate as a fan right now, a month out, how much stock should we put in? And I would say at this point, just try to stay as even keeled as you can, because if the Mets make it, which I do think that they're still going to at this rate, I'm not going to have too high or too low. I think if anything, if they actually make something happen in the wild card, I'll be pleasantly surprised. And then that's where I'm going to start to get prepared to get hurt again. Or maybe we'll have a run that is somehow, some way greater than even what they did last year.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of 162 games, obviously there's always going to be ups and downs, even for the best teams. But it really does feel like, is it even a Mets season if you're not questioning everything at one point? Like, I mean, you look at back at even their best years in recent memory, right? Like 2015, everybody was losing their minds because they were getting no hit every other day in June, and that team turned it around. Last year, like I wanted to blow the core up in May because
Yeah.
like Jorge Lopez threw his glove and they were 11 games under 500. 2022, it was the reverse of that, where you're like, oh my God, this is the best Mets team of my lifetime. And then they pissed it all away one weekend and didn't make it past 3 games against the Padres. So, it's kind of is par for the course at this point. But yeah, it is, there's hope, I guess, in another way, though. It is disheartening to me that at least right now, there's still 30 some odd games left where they could change it. Again, they have to show it to us at this point for me to believe it. But the only like evidence that they could turn things around in October is just like baseball's weird, baseball's random. It's not really anything to do with them. It's more like, well, the Phillies did it and the Diamondbacks did it and the Mets did it last year. So there's that, but I wish there was a little bit more tangible evidence other than just like the randomness of the sport.
Yeah, no, I agree. And luck definitely plays a factor. You can throw out the numbers as much as you want, but it'll always be there. And that's, I think, the beauty and the curse about when you're as locked in as a diehard fan, the way that you and I both are. Like regardless of how what's going to transpire with the club, win, lose, or draw, we're going to be here. So I think, especially for us being fans of a club that unfortunately really hasn't had consistent success, this has been really the heavy point under Steve Cohen. It's been sporadic success. It's always been basically in gaps, if not halves. We have not seen anything at all to really click in unison right now. And that brings me back to my initial point of why, if the Mets do get anywhere this year, it'll not just be because of their pitching, including McClain, who already looks like their best option, potentially Jonathan, who we may talk about later in this one because he looks like that he's nearing sooner rather than later. Brennan Sproat as a reliever, we can talk about that separately as well. But even with all those options, hopefully that will help. And then you have to look at the main issue. And I really cannot emphasize this enough. And that is, again, the identity. Are they going
Mhm.
to finally break that slump of 0 for 53 this year, heading in the ninth inning, down a run? Like, that's the kind of thing, if they do that, or Juan Soto F's around and has his first grand slam of the season,
Right.
or the Mets get a great break and a terrible break for the opposing team there against the Phillies or the Marlins, a ball that definitely should have not have got past somehow. Like, again, it needs to be something, because I feel all season long, going back to when they had their run, 21 games above 500, everything, there weren't a lot of games out of that I felt like that there was this pizzazz, like there was this sparkle, there was this something, this aura around the club. It just felt like a
Mhm.
team that was doing what they were supposed to do, but there wasn't that kind of extra oomph and that moxie that came along with it, the way that we've seen with other teams in years past.